Disclaimer. This is an episode about Colts. Colts can be tough to discuss. We do our best to gloss over and reduce any major triggers within this episode, but it is still an episode about Colts. And so if that's something that you might be sensitive to, please be advised as you listen. Thank you. Welcome to the show. We are recording late at night, so I am not drinking caffeine.
These are my least productive hours of the day.
These are my best.
I was going to say these are my most productive hours, but they're my least favorite hours to work in.
I have written more sermons at this time of night than I can ever remember.
This used to be a good writing time for me, but not since becoming a parent.
I've written so many sermons.
This is the time of night that I used to bang out.
I guess to be 100 still.
This is the time of night I used to bang out college class projects that I was supposed to do over the course of like 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I would put it off until the day before it was due. And then I would do it.
You were one of those?
Yeah. I was a master procrastinator, and I was just good enough at the just BSing it to get away with it.
Yeah.
Like I could just slap some garbage together and it was good enough. It wasn't great. Funny. It was definitely not what I should have done, but it was passable.
See, you and I, we're not the same because this is the time of night that I would do my homework, but not at the last second. Yours was, you had to be doing it this time of night because this is the only
I don't know, babe.
Literally the last
I
second.
saw you crank out a 20-page psychology paper in one evening.
I did.
While I was
did
watching
do that
some
a couple
trash
times.
TV.
But most of the time I try to, especially like when you have like the shorter like posts and stuff, I would get those done at the beginning of the week so that I didn't have to mess with them on Friday. Because I didn't like, especially like when I was pre-Christian, on Fridays, I didn't like doing homework because I was getting drunk. And so I would make sure all my homework was done on Monday so that by the time Friday rolled around, I didn't have to mess with it.
My freshman year of college, the Kansas City Royals were at the World Series, and so we went over to Brett Harrison's house to watch the World Series. And about 70% of the way through that game, it occurred to me that I had a pretty major thing due for a class in like 45 minutes.
Ouch.
And Taylor, us motherly, drove me back to the dorm.
Oh, man.
And I finished it. Good times.
We have plenty of students who do that, like in the middle of a group. They'll be like, I just remembered this. But then you can always tell the ones who are like, oh no, I've got this thing that I've got to get done. I'm I'm like, really? It's 8:30.
I've pulled that before in situations, not like, usually.
So that's why you don't do it on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, it'd be like,
my Yellowstone mug is down here. I've been wondering.
Oh yeah, those are.
I brought it down for you to try an energy drink a long time ago.
Yeah,
can you hand it to me so I can bring it upstairs? Because otherwise I will forget. It's kind of my favorite mug right now.
That's a nice mug.
It's very
big. A big mug.
It's hefty. I like it.
You can hear the heft as she sets it down on the table.
It's wonderful. I love a good mug. Usually for tea.
Yeah,
not like ale or anything.
There's been some studies done recently that have proven that tea caffeine is better for you than coffee.
I'm sure. Tea, if I don't have anything with it though, like gives me the shakes like pretty quickly.
Dude.
Thanks for impersonating.
Kind of like the Quakers.
Yeah.
Were the Quakers a cult?
I think you could make that argument.
I don't know.
Because they're from a region.
Were the Quakers kind of like Puritans?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've studied this.
I haven't studied the Quakers, but I feel like they're a quote.
We're not a sponsor. They're not a sponsor. The oatmeal.
Okay, we're just going to go with that the Quakers are a cult. Boom, there was the intro.
In the ancient days of giants, when the earth was wild and free, a creature roamed the valleys, cloaked in mystery. Is he born of angels' blood and man, a Nephilim so tall, or a shadow of the fallen, yet he the maker's call? He's a biblically accurate Bigfoot, with a lineage from the skies. Not a myth or legend, but a truth that never dies. Is he a remnant of the Nephilim, a titan standing tall? Or does he have the word of God upon him, the last to hear the call?
All right.
I was trying so hard to find a nice segue, and you're just like,
well, okay,
no.
So segue in it.
I'm
and
sorry.
now I can finish that segue.
I was excited to find my mug.
I do know. No, you're good. The Quakers are from an area from, I think it's Albany, New York, to Buffalo, New York. There's this stretch. They called it like the burned out district. And that stretch is responsible for like 15 cults, including,
wow.
If you were like, okay, we might touch some, or not touch, we might step on some toes here real quick, but it's responsible for Seventh-day Adventists, LDS, Quakers, the Mormonism.
We're really gonna go there this weekend.
the Mormonism. That sounds like a disease.
Bro,
I'm not arguing. I'm just saying.
Okay,
Do you hear that sound? We're losing viewers.
back then though,
Listeners.
that like Mormonism, like, because now it's not Mormonism because they tried to rebrand it because all the negative connotations that were associated with Mormonism. But back then, the straight up good, because I want to get on this. So Joseph Smith, have you looked into his life and death?
No.
Okay, so dude was a predator, and I don't mean like allegedly.
Yeah,
I mean like it is confirmed. Molster. We're gonna use different words because I don't
So
want to
we're
get tagged.
talking about cults in this episode.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if you haven't
There
picked
is
that
some
up yet by the
pretty-
title or our intro.
There is some pretty inappropriate stuff, so let's just leave it at general terms
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
Okay.
I will
'Cause
block edit
you and
that
I
out.
have tried to watch a few documentaries on cults, and then like we're like, okay, this is interesting, like watching it just to see the psychology behind it and stuff, and then all of a sudden there's these very, very sexually graphic images in the middle of the documentary,
'cause
which is like,
yeah.
what is the reason for this? Like, okay, you could just say that they were and I'm like, where'd you even get stuff? Like, yeah, no, so we don't need to get into that, just
For sure.
general
So-
terms for that kind of stuff.
The previous locations before they moved, because we kind of associate Utah with that religion,
That's just where they took over.
and so they've changed it to be. Is it? I mix up LDS and Seventh Day, but one of them, it's LDS, right? Is the Mormons, Church of Latter-day Saints, Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints? Yeah. Anyway, that one. So before they moved to Utah, they actually got chased out of the previous town that they were in because they were basically taking it over and making it so that like the people who were involved in the Mormonism at the time, it was called Mormonism. The people involved in the Mormonism, he was like purposely trying to encourage them to only shop at places that supported the Mormon church. And then they burned down a building, and it had a business in it. And then the community basically rised up and kicked him out of town. And then while he was in prison, this is what I looked up at least, while he was in jail, another prison member ended up like shanking him and killing him while he was in prison. So that was how the, what do they call him? Prophet Joseph Smith
I don't know.
died.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a side note, but man, I miss the days when you could just run people out of town.
Yeah.
Were you alive during those
No,
days?
but I
Shoulda never
was
come
anyway.
here.
It's never should have
You
come
don't
here.
belong here.
Get your
We don't
Skyrim
tolerate your
references
kind.
right.
Yeah, and then you get Red Dead. Like, anyway, video game culture. I love video games.
Me too.
But yeah, no, I mean, I'm gonna be I want to be a little bit blunt in this episode, just because how much research did you guys
Shocking.
do? I know, right? How much research did you guys do? A little bit?
Not that much.
Okay.
I mostly looked into a couple of the higher profile stuff. The Manson family and
Manson.
Let's get the Branch Davidians.
Yeah. That's a good one, too, that we can jump into.
That's a good one. Yeah, less
controversial. I don't care. At some point,
considering
you know what? At some point, though, like let's be real. The problem I have with LDS is that they've changed and branded to try to present themselves as an offshoot of Christianity, but they can't be an offshoot of Christianity because they don't believe that Jesus was God, came down and became man, and then died for our sins. They believe that Jesus was man who became God, and therefore they cannot be Christian. They don't believe the same things we do. So Jesus is not their Lord and Savior. He is an inspiration. But I will also add that, I understand that LDS is, a lot of times people who are LDS don't even fully know what the LDS teaches as far as Jesus, because they've kind of rebranded as being a Christian denomination, and they do, they are the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's that almost intentional deception to try to present themselves as believing the same as other Christians do. Therefore, we don't need to even really look into it. And I think it would be smart if you're listening and you are in the LDS and you disagree with me, I would encourage you to look into that difference and the implication of that difference. And I think later on we are going to talk a little bit about the difference and like what makes a cult and what makes something, that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to share some things. And so I want to encourage you, listen all the way through, but look into that a little bit more and realize the difference that it makes. And that doesn't, you know what I'm saying?
We've had little bits of training in what we do from higher up levels above us on what to do if your students or you encounter a cult that is trying to activate or be active on campus, or just like how to approach that, how to recognize it first of all. And so I think some of those things where it's like, absolutely, this is like, there's a few things that it's like, that sort of mentality, that sort of behavior, those sort of dynamics, that's what you look for.
Yeah.
And that's where the red flags come up. But
and even kind of getting into like cults and like what makes a cult a little bit before we get into specifics.
I was going to say, can we just define real quick? Like, can we set up the definition, the difference between a cult and just bad doctrine in
and that's kind of what I want to do.
Unfortunately, there's not really a clear distinction.
Yeah.
Because of the fact
there's not a clear line where that distinction occurs.
I mean, there's
because there are
there's really not.
Think of it, Tanner. What did your family think when you first joined Chi Alpha and first became a Christian? They thought that you joined a cult,
right?
So, like, what about it? Like, what about Christianity, made them think that it was a cult?
Right, and that's what I'm saying is there's not a clear distinction.
Yeah.
There's really not.
Well,
there's actually a saying within the psychology community that the difference between a cult and a religion is time.
Yeah.
That over time, that cults oftentimes are led by a leader who is still alive. A religion is led by a leader who has died. And they try to make that distinction, and I don't agree with them. I don't agree with that. And that is the actual official.
I think that is an official tend to be the way that a lot of people view it, though.
That is now, if we're talking official versus our thought process,
encourages the martyr complex, doesn't it? It's just like in order to be a legit movement, I've got to die. So, like, I don't know,
Right, and if we're talking official versus what we are saying, those are going to be two very different things.
Yeah.
Now, the official, there is no official line.
Right.
And so, so in my mind, I have some distinctions.
Right.
That I classify something as a cult versus a religion. Mm-hmm. And for me, there's a numerous things. One of the things of if someone is currently claiming that they are God, red flag.
Right.
If
that's an obvious one.
And another one based off of what I read from quote unquote my religious text, but even then when you how do you know that you are not in a cult then? How do you know that your faith, because if one faith is correct and all of the rest are wrong, how do you know that your faith is not one of the cults? Because there are many
also,
people who claim to be Messiah during the same time as Jesus.
There's a lot of critics now with the universalism and the coexist movement and stuff who are, they key in on Christians who believe that, our religion, quote unquote, is the true religion. Like, our God is the one true God. We believe that. They see that as a red flag because all the other religions are seem to be a little bit more like they give wiggle room of just like all paths lead to the same truth and a bit like that. So they see that as a red flag.
You're talking like outside of the Abrahamic and like Hindu, outside of the main five probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
But even that, I think a lot of this ambiguity is left up to people's interpretations. I think a lot of people don't go in when was the last time you had a conversation with, it's different for you and I. We actually have conversations pretty frequently with people of different religions, but the average person, when was the last time that, the average American Christian has had a conversation with a Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist, and there's a difference between there's just so much nuance between what their doctrine says, what they say about their doctrine, and then even how what you hear other people say about their doctrine, and then also how you're perceiving that coming off. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say one of my clear line definitions, and I can already tell this is probably not going to mesh perfectly with your definitions, is I think the biggest difference in terms of behavior between a cult and a religion is religions typically focus their members on sending people out to spread their message, whatever they're trying to do, versus cults tend to suck people in and keep them there.
I will challenge that 100%.
I knew you would.
Because cults are actually really good at doing that.
Yeah.
Really good at doing that. The distinction, though, and one of the distinctions now to piggyback off of that, I've literally thought through this because I had the same thought initially. That seems to be a big factor.
Can I throw one caveat into my point, into my thought there, is that I feel like this is more of a rectangles versus squares thing, where not all groups that send people out are not cults, but pretty much every group that just sucks people in and then keeps them there is a cult.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that is fair.
Because I can see how there's exceptions to that rule.
Yeah,
and probably a lot of them. It's not even necessarily a rule, but
but so many modern cults actually encourage outreach.
Yeah.
There's a cult in California currently that they've got some huge, top 50 TikTok stars who they kind of create this. And we
That's
watched
one of the
documentary.
documentaries we watched.
Yeah, they create this cult of combined income and therefore then combined support because they all kind of come from the same thing, so they all raise each other up. And you almost you almost become famous by joining this cult because of the fame of the cult, and it create, and so they almost encourage that. And even looking at Scientology, I create Scientology is technically a religion because it falls under the same kind of caveats as Mormonism does, in that it's older, it's that kind of thing, but they straight up, Scientology straight up has buildings out on the street, and they encourage their members to stand out on the street and encourage people to go out and have conversations.
Yeah.
I think the distinction is one of the main distinctions for me, kind of moving on to my criteria, is questioning. I think the difference between cults and religions a lot of times, and especially my faith, is questioning. That questioning is discouraged. You don't question your authority.
Yeah.
And even within Christianity, and I want to go another step further into that, in that I want to make a distinction that just because you are Christian does not mean that you are not a cult. because there are certain churches that exist that have created within their own sect a cult, and they are Christian. They do believe in Jesus.
Culture.
Yeah.
It's like the culture within.
And there oftentimes the phrase "do not touch the Lord's anointed" is thrown about a little frivolously. It's kind of thrown out there as you honor your authority.
Yeah.
Don't disrespect authority. Don't talk back about authority.
What was the podcast that we listened to that went off about honor culture? Because this is called, just to summarize, is called honor culture.
Yeah, honor culture.
There's I think pretty varying opinions. I mean, maybe even within our listeners too.
Honor culture. But you know what? I'm throwing punches out today. Honor culture is a cult. I'm going to go that far.
Well,
because it can be Christian. They can have Jesus as their Lord and Savior, but they can still be a cult within that.
When it's... this is when it's difficult.
Wait, can I do I'm sipping my tea now. I dropped the bomb.
I'm thirsty.
Deal with it.
I'm thirsty and I didn't bring anything to drink.
That sucks to be you.
I thought one of those cans over there was yours.
No.
Oh, those are just
Tanner's
empty
from
cans?
Weeks gone by.
Yeah. How about that? You know that there's a trash can here in your
Phil
office.
Phil puts his on the floor.
Yeah.
All the empties that are all over the floor over there are his.
I think what we're looking at here,
weird.
to get back on track, and what's coming up in my head is just Christian just culture and our biblical beliefs. We're big on community, what Christian community, the capital C church, is supposed to look like, because we can't, we're not meant to perform every function and our entire purpose that God has for us on this earth entirely alone. We're so much more effective together. You need that bolstering and you need that accountability. But when that accountability crosses the line into control, and it can be a kind of gray area, but that is when the culture of a church starts to turn less towards community and speaking the truth in love and accountability, and into control and only the head mouthpiece
or head mouthpieces.
Yes, yeah. Or if there's a few of them, and sometimes it's not even the lead pastor. What they say goes, and it's not. You're not allowed to question them, because they're the ones. They're the deliverers of the truth rather than the Bible. They are the voice of God rather than the Bible. Even if they're not claiming to outright be God, they're the only ones who can dole out truth.
Or even not as sometimes.
And it's different
I would even
than vision casting, because I'm terrible at vision casting. But yeah, go ahead.
I would take it a step further and actually challenge that a little bit, and not necessarily that they're the only ones who can bring the truth, but if your truth and their truth disagree with each other, therefore they are correct because they are the authority.
Yeah, that's true.
That can even be, and I do agree with you that's a good sign, but sometimes even there's even certain signs that you were in a little bit of a cult, and I'm just gonna, that your church was a cult. In that if you leave your church and you decide to go to a different church, if all of a sudden that church shuns you and you're no longer like friends, and like the friends that you had now start to put walls up and you no longer belong, and there's all of these little things, you know what I'm talking about. All of a sudden everybody knows your business.
Never been to a church like that before.
If that happens, chances are that church was a little bit, maybe not as far as being a cult, but it was basically a cult. It had a cult-like mentality at the very least. Yeah. And if all of a sudden you are now a new shiny toy, and all of a sudden you're welcomed back with open arms, chances are...
Or if you go to a church and you do your best to engage, and not like we've heard from so many people of just like, I entered the service, only the greeter said hi to me, and then no one else said hi to me, and then I left. And it's like, well, you sat in the back, you came 10 minutes late, you left 10 minutes early, and then you came to the pastor to complain about it. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is you put forward an effort like, hey, I'm looking for some genuine community. I want to connect. And then all of a sudden you find that you're not being included in invitations to stuff, or your like conversation is not as welcome, or you're not as included. Like, I feel like that's kind of like, it's like they've decided that you're not good enough to be a part of what they're doing. And I think that's a legitimate reason why a lot of people move on from a church like that.
And there's almost that
you're not of a high enough caliber.
Yeah.
And we say come as you are. Like, and so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess kind of bringing it back to full picture on this, because that's great points, is the full picture is that sometimes churches operate more like cults. Sometimes churches become cults. Mm-hmm. And they'll claim it under the authority of, we believe in Jesus. And so kind of even go back to what I was talking about with like Mormonism and stuff. There is the distinction of our belief in Jesus, but people can believe in Jesus and still be in a cult. There's going into the branch. The branch Davidians were Mormon.
Yeah, because there's people who are dragged into cults because they think, this is a group of believers.
Yeah, exactly. And there's often deception that goes into it. And if you're a Christian or you're a pastor and you're listening to this, one of the best ways that you can ensure to make sure that you are not being a cult-like leader. And I think sometimes, I would say dangerous cults that often lead to like unaliving. Typically the leader knows what they're doing and they're intentionally creating a cult. Mm. But there's often times where you can be a cult-like leader or a cult leader, not even realize that you're leading a cult. And more often than not, that doesn't lead to unaliving, but it causes so much damage. And I think as a Christian pastor, it is so important. And as a leader, if you lead a small group, if you lead a Bible study, it is so important for you to lead with an open hand. And if you can lead with an open hand and recognize that the people that are within and under your influence, because they are under your influence, the people who are under your influence are there for a season, and you keep your hand open and allow them to leave if they want to leave, allow them to go if they want to go, and that they have the freedom, that they're there by choice. Sorry, I can hear everything.
I'm sorry.
I don't remember what.
I mean, you're making the point of just like
make sure that
not trying to establish like control
unintentionally. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, because we believe
you're there for guidance rather than
start to finish micromanaging of
take
someone's
ownership of people,
beliefs.
like your responsibility to lead people correctly rather than ownership of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're going for?
Yeah, and that they're there because they choose to be there, not because there's an invisible force that is forcing them to be there, and therefore you have power and authority over them.
Yeah.
Especially as a pastor who, the people that are under our influence, I would put it that way. The people that are under our influence are always there for a short season anyway, inherently, because they're only with us while they're in college. It makes it easier to lead with an open hand because we recognize we're only going to get a chance to get to know these guys for 4 years and a chance to love them for 4 years. Most of them.
Sometimes 5.
Sometimes 5. Sometimes 6, 7. You got Bryson down there in Tennessee with like 8 years. Could be a doctor, but...
Jeez.
He listens to the show, so I'm giving him crap.
I've been He's going to hear with you guys for almost 10 whole years now.
Yeah, exactly. And so some people do get to stay longer, but by default, we get less than 4 years with most of them. And so it's an opportunity for us to love them for 4 years, and we know they're going to leave. But I think a lot of times church pastors have this mindset that, like, they're there, they need to stay, I don't know. And that can create this animosity that's not healthy, this mentality that's not healthy. And if somebody that's been there for 12 years decides to leave, there's a kind of a bitterness, and you don't allow them to leave with an open hand. You kind of almost like guilt and shame, and like, I can see how easily that can happen. Yeah. You have to be so careful as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and there's a difference between that and just being hurt because someone leaves, because we deal with that hurt quite a bit. Yeah.
I mean, it's I hurt when students graduate.
Because we love these guys.
It doesn't matter why they leave.
And that's that's different.
Right.
It's not.
It is different.
There's no manipulation in that. But
right. And there can't be, really. Yeah.
It's always that genuine concern, that genuine love for them.
Right.
I was going to branch off into something else, but I forgot what I was going to say on that.
Huh?
Oh my gosh.
Davidians.
I'm sorry. I
actually do want to transition into stuff like that.
No, that's good.
But I kind of wanted to circle around one more time just to touch on the
principles of it.
Yeah, the touch not the Lord's anointed, that kind of stuff, and how easily that can create toxic cultures that are cult-like, that are basically become cults. And really what it looks like, and going back to what makes a cult, is when the people who are there to serve the leaders versus the leaders are there to serve the people.
Yeah.
I think you're in a cult, because inherently, especially as a Christian, we believe that, that as leaders, we're to wash the feet of those who are quote unquote below us, the people who are learning from us. We're there to serve them, to help them grow, to meet their needs, to help them get closer to Christ. Because if we operate under the mindset that our eternity already started, we're good. We're trying to make sure other people's eternity gets started, and so therefore we're there to serve. If you ever get to a point where people are there to serve you, you are a dictator and you're no longer a leader. And then I think, as far as like religion, I think the one thing that kind of, for me, sets Christianity apart comes down to that Jesus died and rose again. For me, that distinction makes Christianity like the right religion. You know what I mean? Because if Jesus didn't actually rise again, then he was just a cult leader. It was a very beneficial cult, but he was a cult leader. Him rising again, and the reports and the accounts of that after the fact, is extremely important to Christianity. Anyway,
Jesus even says at one point, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Yeah. And so that's what we model after that. And
there's not another. And
that's just both those things that we were just talking about is what sets Christianity apart from other religions. At least that's, I mean, as far as I know, I haven't heard of any other presentation from any other religion that's like that. Or just like God incarnate came down and sacrificed himself to ensure the eternal stability and love and for his creation,
Yeah. And so because of that, I think that a Christian, a religion, a healthy religion, something you should be a part of. Whether you call it Christian, whether you call it a cult, whether you call it a religion, whatever it is, something that you should be a part of. Yeah, are your leaders there to help you grow, or are you there to help your leaders benefit? And if your presence there is solely one way to help your leaders benefit, get out. You're not going to benefit. There's no benefit to you if your only purpose is to serve. That's
not the sort of relationship that they need. Yeah, they need that sort of relationship from someone else besides their congregation. That's a sign of leadership insecurity. Like if you need to be a drain on your congregation.
Exactly.
In order to suit your needs, then you're not fit to serve because you're not serving.
Because you're not. I mean, you can even take it away from like religious aspects. Like if you look at like a school, the school needs you because you provide like college, you provide money to the school, but then you need the education. You're getting something out of that. And so there's a mutual relationship. There can be mutual relationships that are beneficial, but if it's one way, get out. So do we want to transition into?
I actually had one more thought because I actually used this wording. So like we talk about like the presentation of the gospel, right? And that's just it too. It's not, it's the presentation of the truth that we know, that we've experienced, the truth of, of Jesus and his life and his death and his resurrection and God's creation and his overall plan and just everything. Like we call that the presentation of the gospel. And it's not like, it's not a tool for manipulation. Like we present this truth to people. They can either accept it or they can reject it and move on. And that's the thing. Like no manipulation involved. So anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And I think as a leader or just as a person, when you have people who are under your control, whether it's in a religious aspect or in a work aspect even, when you have people under you and above you and just the way that we should operate in society, I think one of the best ways we can prevent ourselves from becoming dictators and trending that direction is I kind of go back to always remaining teachable. I think remaining teachable is, and we just talked about this on the Discord briefly, but I really think that remaining teachable is the most important thing that we can do as Christians, both in the aspect of like accepting correction, but also being willing to like listen to other viewpoints. And that kind of goes into the kind of what we talked about of questioning authority and questioning people. You know, if when I preach often, like more often than not, when I'm just taking an excerpt out of a chapter or something like that, I will purposely say something to the effect of, you should read this on your own and come to your own conclusions because you should not just take my word for it.
Do your own research.
And don't just assume that your pastor is, or your leader or your pope, I don't know, just whatever your leader's term of existence is.
Title.
Don't just title. There you go. Don't just assume that they are correct.
Well, yeah, and your pastor's not the only one who can hear from God.
No.
So,
if yeah, and
yes, we believe you can hear from God. If that might be provoking to some people too.
So that kind of provides, I think, a decent transition to, I guess, some of the more fringe groups that have appeared throughout history.
What are the ones that you've heard of extensively?
So the main ones, man, I'm trying to think. I there's a lot of names and they're all kind of close enough, like similar enough that I get some of them mixed up. But Children of Jonestown, something like that. There was that one.
Jonestown. Was that Jim Jones?
Jonestown.
Yeah,
I'll talk about that.
Okay, I figured you'd probably have something on.
I want to hear Phil's what he has.
Okay,
though.
so the Branch Davidians, Wendigoon did a really good video breaking down that whole thing and how it all started and where it came from and how it wound
I've just
up.
recently heard this name before, just saying.
Wendigoon?
The Wendigoon,
yeah. He's pretty dope.
It caught my attention because I'm like,
he's Christian.
It's like Wendigo, and I get it now. Yeah. He talks about that kind of stuff.
He's a super cool dude.
That's cool. Anyway,
go
ahead.
So he did a super good video breaking down, and honestly, I didn't know how much I didn't know about Waco and how that all came to be.
Same here.
But so that was, I think it's kind of worth noting that I think a common theme among cults, and I don't know if it's necessarily a defining factor, but something that tends to be the case is that a charismatic leader claims to have some sort of specially given authority.
Yes.
And they will often twist whether it be scripture from Bible or whatever their sacred text they choose to utilize is. I believe David Koresh was Bible based, right?
Bible. Yeah.
Mormon.
Was it Mormon?
I think Branch Davidians are LDS.
Well, he did have a lot of the Bible memorized, allegedly, and would quote it. I don't know if that was misquotes the entire time or...
There's
not always.
But I remember from the documentary that we watched that he was like quoting from the Bible, but then he would just take some verses and twist it.
He had a lot of the Bible memorized, and it is important to recognize too that the Branch Davidians are not the same thing necessarily as what happened at the compound.
Yeah,
because the Branch Davidians were their own thing. And he kind of like hijacked a sect of the Branch Davidians.
I believe that was just the Davidians, right? And then his group was the Branch Davidians. I believe that was how that went.
I think
Am I correct? Was he even a smaller subgroup of the Branch Davidians?
he got kicked out. They got removed.
I thought that was just from the
eventually.
Davidians.
They were removed from the whole religious organization basically because he initially started out as, and which is the way all cults, not all, but most cults start out, is that there's a sense of belonging. There's a benefit to being there. There's a friendship, a companionship, a positive community.
Yeah.
There's that positive community. Branch Davidians, from my remembrance of it, was that they specifically, that's kind of something that they encourage.
Right.
But it's still this mentality of your community still works in town. They still participate in town. They still are very involved in the community and stuff like that. And then Koresh gets in and he begins to, and he wasn't even the original leader.
Kinda
like he didn't start,
pull away, retract.
He didn't even start their branch there. He came in and like took it over and then just kind of like over time just got
gaps
more
in my
and more
memory of how that all went. I did a very brief refresher earlier today, but that was about it.
Began stockpiling weapons and
manufacturing
weapons and all of the above, which is how they got the attention of the government.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, if they hadn't done that, the government is like, oh, you guys are cool to,
What do you think? Even with their like end times prophecies and stuff like that?
There is actually a cult that is south of Hot Springs that, I don't know, you remember there was that kid that went missing? There's a kid that went missing nearby. There's no proof that it went onto the compound, and therefore, because there's no proof it went on the compound, they can't search the compound. And this cult is kind of known for having underage people getting married and stuff like that. But there's, or at least rumored, quote unquote, I will say allegedly, but without definitive proof or a call for CPS or something like that, without something definitive to bring the CPS or something onto the premises, there's nothing that can be done.
So here's the fun fact I wanted to tell you, but I needed to save. Did you know? Okay, there's two facts to this. One's more general, one's more specific. So did you guys know that there's still quite a few sects of the Branch Davidians like still operating and practicing?
Yeah.
Did you know that there is still a group of them operating in Mount Carmel at Waco?
Oh my gosh.
I found that out today. I did not know that. There is literally there are still Branch Davidians at Waco.
I actually, Phil, have been wondering if there wasn't like, not because I have any evidence, but because I've been going back and watching Fixer Upper because I'd never watched through it before. But we're preparing to buy a house and stuff, so I'm like, I just want to watch it and like get some ideas and stuff like that. And I'm like, I did not know that they were in Waco. Like, why do people still live there? Like, I don't know, but it made me wonder, like, what goes on there still? Like, I don't know. Yeah. It just seems, I did not know
cult
that
stuff.
Well, there we go.
Well, okay. But that's, again, I kind of go back to, it is important to remember that Koresh hijacked an already existing they borderline are a cult to begin with.
They were.
Because of the way that they operate. They're borderline cult. But they are a part of a religion that's bigger, that is not as cray-cray
I was going to say
as Koresh
was. Definitely took it to a different level of cult. That's why we're talking like, and that's Koresh, a well-known fringe group thing.
Yes, and Koresh was super smart.
Yeah.
He was a very intelligent person.
Those are the dangerous ones.
And that's the problem. The most dangerous cults are led by people who are very intelligent. I mean, there is an entire cult of I don't know, I'm trying for shadow banning purposes what I want to say, but I mean the Umbridge, we've referred to
the
nasties,
the mustache man from Germany, that in and of itself was a very popular cult.
Yeah,
and just because, and it was led by somebody who, and Umbridge himself, Mustache Man was very intelligent, and very articulate, and that's the other aspect.
Very charismatic,
very articulate. And if you listen to his speeches, if you've ever listened to, there's like, they've been going through and doing like AI rendering of his speeches to make it sound in English the way it would have sounded in German. Because just hearing somebody else translate it doesn't have the same effect.
Right.
Yeah.
But listening to his speeches, you're like, okay, there's some passion in this. But then listening to the AI translations, because the German language in and of itself sounds a little bit angry. And so, Schmetterling, Krakenwagen. But it sounds angry to begin with. So if you translate it into English, you're going to lose some of that. And so to a normal German speaker, there's that anger is going to be missing, and then you hear the passion. And there's certain aspects of that communication that, as horrible as it sounds, that really good public speakers actually emulate. Yeah, there's the rise and the fall, and there's this dude who did a TED Talk. He literally didn't say a single word. He just kept saying what he's going to do to make his speech sound good, and he's like, and at this moment I began to speak louder, and I increased my speed and my volume, and I began to say something powerful, and then I bring it really quiet.
I've heard,
and you're listening very closely.
I've seen a video like that where they do that for how pastors preach too.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I would imagine that probably was a spinoff of the TED Talk.
The poignant
version
pause.
Of it.
And then I'm very gentle, and I bring it back in.
Exactly.
And then I repeat my point. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
As somebody who has taken speaking seriously, I can tell you that even as a pastor, I still integrate some of that stuff into my speaking because, and not to manipulate emotion, because that is bad when especially when pastors and leaders do it on purpose to manipulate emotion. That's not cool. You shouldn't have to manipulate a response. Yeah. However, I do it to help keep attention. So like if I notice somebody's falling asleep, I'll pull out a really loud something and then very quiet really quickly after that. Because if you all of a sudden fall asleep, it's like, boom, it jolts you open, and then you have to listen close, and all of a sudden you're wide awake again, and you can listen. That's to help the audience participate. Umbrage and actually the closest comparison to an American that we have that had that same speaking ability is actually Barack Obama.
Oh.
If you ever listen to Obama speak, Obama was a fantastic speaker.
Yep.
Phenomenal. You can listen to his speeches and get done and being like, I'm on board. I don't know what you're doing, but I will follow you. I hearing a lot of people
saying like, there's just something about his voice and how he speaks that
he is a very good speaker.
Yeah.
In the same lines. And oftentimes cult leaders are good at doing the same thing.
Yeah.
David Koresh was actually good at doing that too. Jim Jones, very good at doing that too. The weird
talking about this just reminds me of the episode of Office with Dwight. When he has to go and speak at the convention, and Jim gives him the tips of like, here, watch these speeches by Mussolini and study Stalin and
for real. But yeah,
it just is
Gosh. Okay, back to Phil.
Yeah,
and the Branch Davidians. There are Branch Davidians still alive. Do I need to slap you real quick, wake you up?
No, I'm good. I don't have a whole lot more. It was just that
you don't need to smack him. You just need to change your voice, right?
Yeah, just get really loud and really
yell at me and then whisper.
Yeah. Our listeners are going to hear that. You should be like, hopefully, yeah. Anyway, so what do you guys know? So the other prolific one is Jim Jones. To kind of get that out of the way a little bit. Do you know much about that?
Not an awful lot. I didn't do any research on that one.
Jim Jones.
Just that's where we get the term "drink the Kool-Aid." Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
I already created the image for this podcast, and I showed him, and I was like, "Do you get it?" And he's like, "No." I'll show it to you afterwards. It's amazing. Our listeners have already seen it, so I might as well explain it. But anyway, it's Bigfoot drinking Kool-Aid. But then on his shirt, for some reason, AI glitched out and said kook egg or kook aid. And I was like, this is amazing. This is perfect. And I was like, do you get it? And he's like, because it says kook. And I was like, no, the Kool-Aid. And then he's like, no. And I was like, all right, I'll share it on the podcast. So anyway, giant circle. So Jim Jones, man, they talk about a a cult that had all of the quote unquote cult like right things going for it. It was a place where you could join and you felt like you belonged. Tried to point you to a higher calling in your life. There was a higher purpose for you, all of this other stuff. And then all of a sudden, so Jim Jones began, it was like he knew he was going to unalive everybody.
Okay, so
I can't say that word. He knew he was going to unalive everybody. I need to remember to edit that.
Wow.
Okay.
Can I real quick?
Wait. Let me finish what I was.
It's just gone. Real quick. I'm sorry that my sigh completely flustered you.
That's
okay.
Before the unaliving thing, I was literally
we've talked about this 2 times now. So like charismatic dude, very intelligent dude. Once again, so this is my question: is it like, because you see this with leaders sometimes, just like you wonder, were they making it up as they went along? And pivoting according to what their reaction from their cult members was, or did they have this planned out start to finish? You know, the difference is that's the difference between like leadership styles, but also just the psychology behind it. You know, like, could you be more forceful and pull it off, or could you make it look like you're a bit more flexible, but it all works out to your greater plan that you have, you know, like how premeditated is it, you know?
I think that segues perfectly back into what you were starting to say.
Yes.
So Jim Jones, it was like he knew he was going to have to unalive everybody. But it didn't go to plan. I know that for sure, for 2 reasons. But he began having like these, so he would have these like fake self-unaliving practices where he would talk about like you're unaliving yourself to yourself, like you're dying to yourself kind of thing.
I couldn't remember if it was that or if he was like a false healing ministry, you know.
He probably
was there some of that?
I don't know.
I can't remember. But anyways.
And so he started going through like practicing dying to yourself and all of those things and almost like creating mock mass unalivings.
Self-unalivings.
Just unalivings in general.
Mass intentional self-unalivings.
But so you began practicing those almost as like a higher power, like you've got to rise up, you've got to rise above your issues, rise above your problems, stuff like that. Well, and then they move to South Africa, I believe, and they create this compound and they do all this stuff, and then a government agent comes and checks them out and disappears. Most like, I think that the cult unalived him, and then from there, the leader Jim Jones basically like panicked. From what it looked, from my interpretation of what I see from what I studied of it, basically panicked and then was like, "All right, we're gonna do this thing." And then they all unalive. And at that point, I don't even know if it was self-unaliving, but they unalived everybody. And then the ones who refused to drink the Kool-Aid, that's where the phrase comes from. You brought that up earlier, because they put poison in the Kool-Aid and then had everybody drink it, and they're like, parents are like forcing their kids to drink it. It was horrible. And then the ones that refused were shot, and so like only a small handful were able to escape, and that handful that escaped, man, talk about a wake-up call. You know, it's actually kind of created survivors of cults like that have created certain studies within the psychology community, because the problem with normal, like regular psychology is, you know, you come in, talk through your problem, get to the bottom of it and move on. Well, when you escape a cult like that, there's no bottom of it, especially if you were a kid. There's just the trauma. And so you go to counseling and they talk through the trauma, but the problem is you're just you're talking through your trauma. There's no root. There's no basis that can help you get over what happened. And so traditional counseling is actually horrible for survivors of cults, because it just makes their problems worse and worse and worse until the point they get to the point where they end up unaliving themselves. And so there were other people from the Jim Jones compound who ended up unaliving, and that's actually satanic cults. Like we're talking real satanic cults where they do all of the bad stuff that I think we've talked about in other episodes, but I'm not going to get into it for the sake of shadow banning. And if we haven't, there's some, I mean, you can imagine it's a satanic cult. You can imagine the kind of things they do. And if you think they're dark, like they're darker, like they're worse. The worst thing you can imagine, they do worse. And people who survive those more often than not end up self-unaliving themselves because they try to go to counseling. And the problem is that traditional counseling makes the problem worse. And so there's actually specific studies of trying to like figure out how to counsel people who survive these cults. And in general, you know, because more often than not, one of the criteria of chances are you join a cult is you were in a rough spot in your life. That's usually a sign that that's the number one sign that you possibly joined a cult.
Yeah.
Was you were in a rough spot in your life and they promised to make it better. Well, Christianity is that.
You know what number two is?
What?
If they call their place a compound, just don't go. If they use the word compound, do a 180 and just...
We've even started addressing things like calling themselves family and stuff like that too, because it's like
the family.
I never even thought about how toxic that can be, you know. But anyway,
or honestly, community. Because I'm like,
become a
because a hurting person genuinely in need of community, and I've even talked about like genuine need of community and stuff like that. Because you know, there's times where we feel lonely, we want just genuine community and stuff. But yeah, no, that's kind of a cringy word now too.
Well, and you know, in a comparison that I kind of made while I was doing some research, that what's the difference between a cult and a gang? The source of your worship. Because in a cult, you're worshiping a deity or a person who is deity-like more often than not. Somebody who has a higher authority because of God or their, version of God. A gang is you're worshiping sex, drugs, alcohol, money. And so there's the promise of community and money. And the promise of community and wealth and community and all the things you ever wanted. Well, that's literally, in my mind, as I'm thinking through it, the difference between a gang and a cult is the source of your worship.
But then what about the Manson family, though? Because they use drugs and psychedelics and sex and, promise of,
But they also believe Manson could hear from God.
I also think as far as the gang comparison, I think gangs also tend to be a little bit more focused on protecting each other because they're typically involved in shady, illegal activity and territory. Those, I think, tend to be pretty major. I guess it depends on where you're talking.
But cults do the same kind of thing.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying, those are...
Right. That would be a distinction.
Defining elements.
But I would actually say that cults do the same thing. Because, if you look at any of the big compound cults, bro, they're expanding their compound, they're growing, they're trying to create new branches of it, all that stuff. And they have that weird...
going to war with anybody, though, typically,
Waco.
Yeah, that's... But...
Jim Jones.
So hold on. I needed to take, and I'm on board with this. I just want to ask, are we saying that the FBI and the ATF, the federal government, is a gang? And that was a gang war.
That's basically what happened.
Okay, but
I'm not against our government in any way, shape, or form. I love our government. They're amazing. They have our best interests for us. They love us so much. But that whole thing was handled so poorly.
Well, and they were on a hot streak.
Oh my goodness! They were trying to make up. I was going to
say we just finished up
screwing up over and over again,
absolutely botching a bad deal up in Idaho, and it's like, okay, we can do better this time. Let's burn 50 kids
for Ruby Ridge, and in and of itself, it's like there's.
I'm laughing, but it's just because it's ironic and stupid and horrible. Not because it's funny. So that was a horrible thing.
So crazy enough, actually, gangs, a lot of times they will send some of their highest leaders to the military.
I was going to bring up military at some point because
the military. Bring up the military.
I'm sorry, Phil, but you hear. I've seen episodes of the TV show that delve into this topic and stuff about law enforcement, military, serve a purpose. very brave men and women, but sometimes there's a subculture in there of this quote unquote brotherhood to the point where you're covering for each other's crimes in order to run your own, like that kind of stuff. Right. And it's like, so is that a cult?
Yeah, I would say it is. And gangs straight up, a lot of times
it's a subculture that,
Yeah, gangs, a lot of times they'll send their cleanest, the people who have not had a bunch of jail time. Because now our military, it used to be just, you're on your last chance. You can either join the military or go to prison the rest of your life. But now it's like there's standards, and so the guys who have like the cleanest record oftentimes will get sent to the military, and they both are learning how to get trained so that they can be more efficient at culture, like turf wars and stuff like that, but also to recruit, because a common occurrence with people who are in the military is when they get out, they're missing that brotherhood. They're missing that camaraderie. Yeah. Cults do the same thing. Yeah. They pry on that sense, that need for us to have community, and they offer up this picture perfect available
organizations.
Cult. I call them all cults, but they offer the promise of that community with this picture perfect window, and so there is this benefit before it turns crap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I should clarify, I was in no way suggesting that there aren't a lot of similarities between gangs and cults, just that I don't think it can be boiled down to one difference.
No. That's kind of what I'm saying too.
I would say it is, because if you threw in some authority, like let me put it this way.
Variance in the other
I don't
criteria.
think so. I will put it this way.
I think that's why this is such an interesting topic, because there is so much nuance, and like we said, we can't just go down and it's a list. So same thing.
Okay, I will add a caveat. All gangs are cults, but not all cults are gangs.
I can work with that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So gangs are cults.
Squares and rectangles.
Yes, they're all in the same community, because gangs offer up a sense of community, a sense of
Webster's dictionary.
Webster is stupid.
Well, okay. Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay, so whatever dictionary you're not offended by.
But I will say, legit, look it up. I'm just kidding. But I will go back to one of our initial statements was the standard definition is something that I don't necessarily agree with. And so Webster's might have a standard definition, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to agree with it.
AI did not understand the assignment here.
Let's hear it.
No.
Oh. What do you mean? No?
It didn't even get the spelling of the word right. So, yeah.
I need to see this.
It says, it's probably not as bad as I think it is, but it said C-L-U-T.
Clut?
Yeah, yes. I typed in cult, but AI's overview says clut. C-L-U-T.
Nice.
And that's, it's just like... Weird.
In the clerk, we all fan. I hate myself. I will sit here all day and denounce Zoomer slang, and then I will turn around and use it in the most egregious way possible.
Is a clerk when colts meet in a yurt?
Too tired for this.
Okay. Well, while she looks that up, so I want to... Courtney actually already segued us into... I think maybe Phil did too, a little bit, into Manson a little bit.
Yeah.
Because Manson, they did deal with drugs a lot, and it actually was one of the main gathering points. But I want to share a fun fact about Manson. So I already shared this with both these guys, but in high school, I actually did a report on Manson and voluntarily read a couple of books to try to learn more about like what happened. And through this book report, was having a conversation with my mom, and come to find out, my mom grew up just down the road from Spawn Ranch. Spawn Ranch is where the Manson family operated. Now, I want to add...
Your mom lived in Bakersfield. area.
Outside of Bakersfield, yeah. And so Spawn Ranch, so just to kind of just add an asterisk to this, not all people who went to Spawn Ranch were a part of the Manson cult. Manson just used the things that were going on at the Spawn Ranch in order to recruit his little family. But I asked my mom on numerous occasions, had she ever been to Spawn Ranch? And she would laugh and change the subject. So I am 99% sure my mom at some point had been to Spawn Ranch. And my mom was a hippie in California in the 60s and 70s.
4 miles from this area.
And so she would never deny it. She would change the subject. She would literally get, if you knew my mom, she would get this, anyway, you're crazy. And then just move on. And then I'd be like, no. Mom. And so once I pulled her into it, I was like, Mom, have you ever been to Spawn Ranch? And she's like, she literally went, you're funny, and then just changed the subject. And I was like, I asked her numerous times. I am 99% sure my mom had been to Spawn Ranch.
Wow.
So that caused me to have a little bit more interest in this and learn a little bit more about it. Because at the time, I thought that everybody who went to Spawn Ranch had participated in the family. No. Everybody who went to Spawn Ranch was probably participating in psychedelics. And from there, a very, very, very small group of them did eventually join the Manson cult. The Manson cult, very much so, he was kind of that deity figure. He was very smart. He could hear from God. And he wanted to incite a culture war. And the strange thing about Manson, and that I actually talked with Phil before we started the episode, is there is something very interesting and ethically, you have to ask the question. So Manson got way harsher of a prison sentence than anybody else, I think, really. Like, he's out of opportunities to get out, but he inevitably always fails them because he's cray-cray. But he got this huge sentence, but he actually was one of the only ones who didn't actually do anything. Mm-hmm. He was the accomplice. He wasn't the actual one who enacted. Mm-hmm. And there was actually a girl who did do the acting she's free right now. And that makes you question ethically, is that okay? Now, non-ethically, and I'm using my common sense, yeah, he needed to be in jail way longer than everybody else did. But according to the way the law exists as a law,
right,
you have to start asking yourself, if you're not thinking of something psychologically or with a dual standard and just applying the law to this situation, should he have been in jail the longest out of all of them? And you would almost have to be like, no, according to that. But common sense would be like, yeah, he needed to be. But yeah,
interesting.
Is an interesting cult that existed.
It just made me think of a way that we could say that term when it's like unaliving someone else. But yeah, it's more. It's another Office reference, but we could just say muck duck.
Muck duck. There we go. Because that's what makes it more. Because the R is menacing. That's why it's and not muck duck.
I get it. Okay, yeah.
Because the R is menacing, and that's why it's used. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, we'll use muck duck. Also, unaliving somebody. Mara. I did like what we said a few weeks ago. Unaliving somebody without their permission.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, because if it's with their permission, then you're probably in Canada. Yeah.
Wow.
Or the Netherlands. I think they do too. Anyway, that's a whole different can of worms. But back to...
wrap this up soon.
Jeez.
We're going off the rails.
Okay, so there was this thing. There was this study they did. And this is why I think cults continue to function, okay? They started this experiment out. They had a room full of people who were in the experiment. And... about every 5 minutes or so,
I know this one.
They would have a bell that would go off. Yep. Everybody would stand up for just a few seconds, and then everybody would sit down. And one by one, they would bring in new people who weren't in on the experiment, and then they would eliminate one person who would get to their appointment and leave. And the new people, the first time, they would kind of look around and be like, what the crap? And then, but by the second time, almost every single time, they would begin standing up with the bell every time it went off. They would stand up, do their thing, sit back down. And this continued to the point where it had been like quite a while. And they get to the point where everybody who was in on the experiment was no longer there. They were completely gone. It had been going on for a while. And they stop the experiment. They go in, they start asking people, like, why are you standing up every time the bell rings? And they're like, and they look around like for help, and they're like, I don't know. And then like they begin to realize that literally nobody in there realizes or has any idea why they're standing up.
Yeah.
They just were all doing it because everybody else was doing it. And there's been other studies that go on that's like, if they bring in one person and 5 people who are in on the thing, and they say, what is pi? And we know pi is 3.19?
3.14.
Okay. 159.
Okay, so I mixed it up in my brain so it's like if they ask everybody what pi is, and all 5 of the people who are in on the joke say 3.19, that like almost 100% of the time, the one who is separate will then choose to agree with the people, even if they know that they're wrong. So they'll say, what's pi? And the person will be like 3.19. And then they'll be like, that's correct. So then when they get to that other person, they will just, even though they know it's 3.14, they'll say 3.19 because everybody else has, and they're saying it's correct. And so there's this need to belong that extends beyond even our common sense reasoning and our knowledge of truth. And that sense and that need to belong extends so much so that we will do things that we don't know why we're doing them, just so that we don't appear different from everybody else. And cults prey on that
PREY.
Yeah, on that that innate existence within us to do those things.
Yeah.
And then you add in the fallen element of just humans can become corrupt and evil really quickly, like the Stanford experiment. And we'll get into that on a totally different episode. But those experiments, I think, really point to the tendencies of mankind and humankind. And so then we kind of go back to cults and talking about the government and stuff like that. You start wondering if you get the wrong person in charge of an official program, just because it's official, in my mind, doesn't make it less of a cult.
This is the perfect time for me to ask the question that I wanted to ask, because I didn't get into it with you guys, but I saw in the Discord we were discussing the necessity and the responsibility of Christians to call out corruption, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're mostly talking about within the church or whatever religious organization you're part of.
We weren't mostly talking about anything. It was, I worded it vague on purpose.
But anyway.
You told me you were going to open that can of worms.
I did.
And I was like, I'm just not going to read any of this.
That is an important can of worms. And so you got to ask, and thinking about like Ruby Ridge and Waco really makes you wonder. There's plenty of other things that make you wonder, but blatant failures like that almost seem too egregious to be unintentional, or at least completely unintentional, really make you wonder what level of corrupt is a lot of our government and at least a lot of government agencies at. And do you have not just the right but the responsibility to at least point it out, even if you don't take like direct action against it?
Right.
Is it important, and is it necessary for Christians to point to that and go, that's wrong, and that should not be happening?
Yeah,
exactly. And I have the perfect story to end on.
Beautiful.
Now, if we want to say anything more about that, we should, but I agree with you. And I actually would argue as Christians, and I brought up the Umbridge and the mustache man from Germany. I mentioned that, and how, there's not as thick of a line as oftentimes Christians create And I think sometimes it's an avoidance technique because we don't like the nuance that goes into having conversations about politics because people can get so heated and and you never want to be the reason somebody that chooses to walk away, or not even necessarily walk away, but somebody who doesn't give Jesus a chance because as a Christian, you disagree with their politics. And so therefore they're never going to give Christianity a chance or something like that. But, there is, even within the different politics of the different sides, there can exist cults within the politics of it that agree with it and can manipulate and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I personally, my belief, and I kind of stand on the line of and there were a few other people that kind of said something of like, you try to do your best. And I think that is smart. And I would agree. You try to do the best, like the best that you can until it gets to a point where you can't.
Yeah.
And the last story that I want to share that is a proof of sometimes because people are doing things quote unquote by the books that doesn't make it right. Right.
That was a bona fide Freudian slip right there.
Kind of.
It was on purpose.
No, it wasn't on purpose, but it is because it was a Freudian slip because I'm talking about the Chilean. I did not see that cult. Okay. The Chilean Nazi cult. Okay. So after World War II gets over with, okay, we all know the conspiracy theories that have been verified now of communities of up to 75,000 who are former third rich people who are a part of that Umbridge cult.
You just wiped your muff like that.
Mustache.
With one finger.
But so it's confirmed that they exist there. That they still do. So there was a Chilean
I didn't
town.
know in Chile though.
There was a Chilean town.
Dude, South America's riddled with it.
One specific, and that goes into talk about a completely different trail that we're not going to go on. The Peruvian face peelers.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
I think that those are just remnants of the third riches.
Can we call them Nazgul?
I have no idea what that is. I've just heard the term. So
we will talk about that in a couple of weeks. Then probably.
I will not research it. And I will leave it to you guys.
So
tell
the Chilean cult. We'll leave out that word. You know that we're talking about Mustache Man from Germany. The Chilean cult was started by one of his leading scientists who was a doctor. He goes down to this town in Chile and opens up a hospital that he owns. He fronts it with his own money because he's incredibly wealthy because he stole all of his money from Jews and other countries. War. He profited off of the war. So he creates this hospital. And in this hospital, he begins to adopt young men. Okay, so these young men would go in. So the how it got discovered and became public was a young man who had a fever. I believe it was a fever. He goes into the hospital, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we just want to keep you overnight just to make sure that you're okay."
So like a boy.
So yep, boys, specifically boys. This doctor liked boys, young boys. As
opposed to young man.
Yep, young boys, underage, very underage. His sister comes in and is like, "Hey, I'd like to see my brother." And they're like, "Sorry, your brother's going to need to be here for a few days. He can't come home, so come back in a few days." So she comes back in a few days, and she's like, "Hey, I want to see my brother." And the hospital's like, "I'm sorry, your brother's already been released." Well, so what this guy would do, he had lawyers who were also of the Mustache Man Germany descendants who were very, very good at what they do. And they would create adoption papers. And this man would, according to the law, legally adopt these young men from the hospital. So he legally was their parent and guardian. And he began to build this giant gang of young men. And he did other things just for the sake of trigger warning. would do other things, but he legally adopted all these kids, and the parents couldn't do anything because this village was exceptionally poor. And so they couldn't afford to hire lawyers. And because most of the lawyers worked for him anyway, because he would give them kickbacks for every boy that they were able to adopt. And so he legally, according to the government, and as a part of the government, and he ran the government in that community, basically, he legally owned the rights to all of these kids as their legal parent and guardian. And so this continued for a long, long time. And so we go back to, if you see something, even if it's legally occurring and is legally correct, it, according to the law, at that time in that location was legal. It's very clearly wrong.
Yeah.
Do you speak up morally? I think as Christians, it is our duty to point to injustices.
Yeah.
I think we have to. And that doesn't mean we create a picket line and protest it.
I was going to say, it's about going to the right source with it.
There's a correct way of doing it.
I mean, if you didn't know that dude owned the whole government there, but how would you know who to go to,
Let's say there were, 25% of the community were Christians who decided to start speaking up because they've seen this problem happen, and they start to share this problem. And all of a sudden there gets to be this name known for this hospital that they tend to adopt boys legally against their parents' will. People would stop going to the hospital and he becomes powerless. They didn't have to do a thing.
Or
they didn't have to create a lawsuit. It most likely would have created another outlet. But even still, you point attention to it. You didn't have to do a thing other than just communicate about it.
Right.
Say something. But then that goes back to the see something, say something kind of cult-like behavior that exists on the other side of things, and reporting on people to your government. And that falls into the other umbrage not.
So is see something, say something, is that like the bad side of it?
That
because
I
had that phrase pop in my head while you were talking early, and then you brought it up, and I was like, oh, it's not like a bad.
I don't know for sure, but it basically
sounds
the orange is
1984-ish.
Yeah.
Well, and also it's kind of a Germany
is it?
Kind of. They were encouraged to report on their Jewish.
Yes, I know that, but I'm just talking about the phrase itself.
Yeah. And so I do not think that reporting people to the government is the correct way about see something, say something. I think ethically, if people are doing something wrong, we should speak up about it. We should be able to communicate, hey, I think this is wrong.
I think I'm having trouble with S's tonight. I think it's situationally dependent. And I also, as a cop, I'd struggle with that a lot because there are times where, like, I don't want vigilante justice to ever be the only answer. Like the CEO situation sucks, man. It sucks that somebody felt that was their only course of action to make the difference that they felt they needed to make.
And let's say, even take it a step further, let's say it was the only action.
Right, sure.
It sucks that it was the only action they could take.
Regardless of whether he was correct or not, that was the only action he had. No, regardless of whether he was correct that was the only course of action that he had that would make the difference that he wanted to make. You don't ever want that to be the case.
The reality.
But when the system is broken and protects or allows for those injustices, it's like, man, it's hard to say that you fully condemn it. Like, again, never condoning it or encouraging it by any means, but like, I understand how people get to that point, and I would understand if someone in that little Chilean village felt the need to commit some
forced unaliving
muck ducks. Some muck ducks. I would understand, and I don't think I would condemn them for that.
Even though it's not right?
Even though it's not...
Or even though it's not wrong, or even though it is wrong, it's not... You know what I'm trying to say?
Can wrong be just?
There's instances within the Old Testament... So I'll put it this way. There are instances within the Old Testament that God, same God we serve, commanded the Jews to eliminate a people group.
That's something a lot of people struggle with when it comes to believing in God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. That's one of the things I struggle with.
In war, if you go to war, it's
carrying that out yourself.
Right.
In service of your country.
Would it have been the godly thing to do for somebody to infiltrate and muck duck Mustache Man before he had a chance to get as far as he did?
Yeah.
Would that have been the right thing to do as a Christian? And that goes into the Bonhoeffer stuff like that, and
still reading
that's
that.
A relevant topic and
giant book. So.
Yeah, but it's and it kind of goes back to when do we speak up? And I think that there's more nuance than we give it credit for.
Agreed.
Yeah,
and because of that, it kind of goes back to, and bringing it all back to cults and stuff like that. When you are afraid of something that is not God, your motives are wrong. Yeah. And so if you're afraid to speak up because people might judge you, you're wrong. If you're afraid to stand up for what's right because you might be muck ducked, you're wrong.
Yeah.
If your fear is in anything of this world outside of fear of the Lord, in my opinion, you're wrong. And I think that if we can eliminate that, cults would have a lot less power, because most of the way that they operate, most of the reason people stay, even once it gets to the point where they recognize something is wrong, is they're afraid.
Yep.
They're afraid of losing their friends, their family. That's the way Scientology works, is if once you leave, you have to disassociate with, or once somebody leaves, everybody has to disassociate with them. Yeah. So if your family stays in and you are out, they cannot stay in unless they disassociate with you. And if they find out that you are still communicating with them, they will kick you out.
Right.
And so there's fear. And then finance is how much money they put into it. There's fear. There's all these different fears. If we would eliminate that fear, people would be less likely to stay.
Yeah.
Or fear of physical consequences, stuff like that. But yeah, my phone has died. That was a fun topic.
Yeah.
This is kind of
feels like we're just getting started on this.
This might be we pick it back up.
There's a lot more substance to that than I expected.
We can each pick a cult and do a quick little thing on it.
Cults are one of those weird things of my interest is aligned because religion, I'm a pastor, psychology, and then I do have this weird interest in cults and how they click and how they operate, and not from a like, I just want to learn what makes people stay, why. It's so crazy to me. But with that, we hope that you don't join any cults, and we hope that you are not participating in a cult. And if you are,
unless it's our cult,
yeah. Sorry. If you are and you need help getting out, reach out. Honestly, you can reach out to me. I can point you in the right direction with somebody who can get you out of your cult. Real talk, if you're listening to this and you're involved in something that you want to get out and you need help, reach out. Have the communication. Start the communication.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, if you're not involved in the cult, be careful out there. There's cults all over. There's cults south of Crawford. There's cults at Hot Spring. There's cults everywhere. Pick your poison. Pick your community. There's probably a cult within it. Satanists operate everywhere. Wow. But we hope you have a blessed day. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, do all of those things. Keep it up. You guys are amazing. We love you guys.
Check us out on TikTok follow us on TikTok so that we can do lives.
Yeah, follow us and share our profile too. Yeah, because we need 1,000 subscribers to go live on TikTok.
While TikTok is still a thing, right?
Trump's gonna defend
it. Ain't gonna go away.
But
we tried this before.
I'm not following.
Well,
this.
they did officially start the process of how to remove it, but then Trump's like, I like it because I feel like I got voted in. And anyway, I agree. But anyway, we need 1,000 subscribers to go live. We'd like to start going live before our shows when Phil and I are just talking. So do that. Share our TikTok. We love you.
Clean your office before then.
The music has started. I got a cool sign I'm gonna put up, courtesy of my wife. She's amazing. Thank you. Love you. Bye.
Bye.
In the ancient days of giants, when the earth was wild and free, a creature roamed the valleys, cloaked in mystery. Is he born of angels' blood and man, a Nephilim so tall, or a shadow of the fallen? yet heeding the Maker's call. He's a biblically accurate Bigfoot, with a lineage from the skies. Not a myth or legend, but a truth that never dies. Is he a remnant of the Nephilim, a titan standing tall? Or does he have the word of God upon him, the last to hear the call?